And we are live. Okay, Jerry, thank you so much for joining me. I am so honored to have you on my show because I've been following your work for some time. And I just found out today that there's a connection between you and another person that I really like, Travis Rice. I'm a really big snowboarder myself. I would have never made that connection, but I had actually watched his documentary, The Fourth Phase, and that was before I had discovered your work. And so now knowing that you're connected to Travis Rice, that's also incredible. And then you're also connected to another amazing friend of mine, Veda Austin, and we'll see how long we can go in this episode without bringing up Veda and her work. But thank you for joining me, Jerry.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Alec. And yeah, Travis Rice, it brings back fun memories. I met, I'm not a snowboarder, and I hadn't known about Travis. And one day I get an email from him um, asking if we could meet. And so we met. We had a nice dinner together, and he paid. It was very nice, with a colleague of his. And he asked me if I would be willing uh, 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 to allow him to use my book, latest book title, The Fourth Phase of Water, for his next film. And I couldn't have been more delighted. And he came by with a crew of some 10 people to our laboratory and spent a couple of days with some of his colleagues and technical people uh, shooting. And at the end, at the opening in Los Angeles at a fancy theater that's been around for a long time with red carpets and whatever, neither he nor I knew exactly what the final film would be like, because it depended on the editors, not on Travis. So Travis was snowboarding with his colleagues and friends all over the world, exotic places, and nobody knew. So there was the opening, and I was sitting at the edge of my chair and wondering how much of us would actually be in the movie besides the title of the movie, and it was almost nothing.
Yeah.
Um, um, until the end, there were some voiceovers, and until the end, and at the end, this was about 1 minute of a photo shoot that extended, or uh, communication, interview, whatever, that extended for a few hours. And it was a story about Einstein and his daughter, who had some strained relations, and he was trying to restore positive relations. But at the very end, they started showing the credits, and there were so many credits because a film like that requires so much in the way of technology and support and whatever. And at at the very end, it was uh, uh, an image of their campsite, of Travis and his colleagues. And they panned around and they saw people relaxing in front of their tents. And finally, there was Travis uh, sitting in front of his tent reading a book. Uh, and what was the book? It was The Fourth Phase of Water.
Wow.
So it was, I was very happy to see that. The book has become really popular. So anyway, I'm sorry to deviate.
No, that's a cool story. That's cool to have all that context because I'm a huge fan of Travis Rice, and it's cool that he's interested in this stuff. That's really cool. So I want to let's just go ahead and start. And I've become so fascinated with water and its implications on health and the nature of reality. And I've had so many conversations with people who are understanding of the importance of a terrain based approach to health and the implications for water when it comes to bioresonance, possibly, and water's ability to communicate and retain memory. But I guess to start, the best question to ask is, what is the fourth phase of water? What is easy water? And how did you come to discover it?
Okay, so your question is broad ranging, and if I answer the first half and forget the second half of your question, please remind me.
Okay.
Okay, so fourth phase water it really is what used to be called structured water, And for a century, scientists had the sense that there ought to be a different phase of water or a different kind of water that doesn't fit into the usual paradigm, because the usual paradigm runs into problems. It runs into, shall we say, anomalies, stuff that doesn't fit what we ordinarily might think. Um, and, um, and there's a website that deals with that. I think the number of anomalies of water, in other words, stuff that doesn't fit the usual paradigm, now numbers like 65 or something like that. And when the number gets high enough, usually anomalies are something that we sort of disregard and sweep under the carpet. And we hope that in the future somebody will figure out uh, how to fit the current theory, how to fit the anomalies into the current theory. So they're no longer anomalies, but they fit. But the number keeps growing. And, when the number grows high enough, you have to scratch your head. That's why my hair is thinned out. And you kind of have to raise the question, well, maybe there's something wrong with the central idea or the central theory, because if the number of anomalies keeps growing, then you have to ask the question: Are we heading in the right direction, or do we need to go at right angles to the direction we're heading to get to the truth? So this general idea of structured water has come up over the years. And that's really where we started. But fourth phase water is we like to think of it as a replacement for the word structure, because structure doesn't, everything has structure, and by structure, the people who were putting forth the idea meant ordered. So the original idea, idea with substance to it, came from a guy named Gilbert Ling. And Gilbert Ling passed a couple of years ago, just shy of age 100, and he was in the first cohort of people to come from China to study in the U.S. They looked all around China. They picked the three most promising scholars: a physicist, a chemist, and a biologist. And Gilbert was the biologist. The physicist went on to win a Nobel Prize. The chemist went on to win a Nobel Prize. And Gilbert should have won maybe 2 Nobel Prizes, but he was passed over because his work was too controversial. What was the controversy? He said that in biology, the water inside the cell was quote unquote structured, and he had a lot of evidence to back that up. And by the time I met him at a conference in Hungary, he'd already written, I think, 5 books. So I went and I met him, and I was just overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed in hearing what he had to say, and also in hearing what others had to say who had evidence to support his point of view. It really made an impression on me, and I'm scratching my head. Even then, I was scratching my head. That was a couple of decades ago, thinking that if he's right, then all of biology is wrong. As simple as that.
Huge implication.
Pardon?
I just said huge implication.
A huge implication. And so I didn't trust myself. I gave one of his books to some of my students and postdoctoral fellows to read, and they all came back with the same point of view. This looks real. It looks interesting, and if it's true, then all of biology needs to be revised. So step one, I'm a guy who just doesn't sit back, and let others do it. I felt an absolute compulsion to get into this field. We had been studying muscle contraction before that, the molecular mechanism. But I'm thinking we got to do something on it, because this is much more interesting than muscles. Muscles are, of course, extremely interesting. How do they work? But this is even more profound. And so these students came back to me with all of the positive feedback that I just had to do something. First thing to do is write a book, and the book was called Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life. And the purpose of the book, that was 2001. The purpose of the book was basically to broadcast what Gilbert Ling was thinking in terms that could be understood by any intelligent person. And because Gilbert didn't succeed in doing that, Gilbert had and apart from his innate brilliance, he'd sit down at the typewriter or the word processor, he'd bat something out, send it to the publisher, and that's it. Editing is a word that was not in his vocabulary. He had no. And so you can imagine if you've ever tried reading through any of his books, it's a challenge. So I decided to write a book, which could have been called Gilbert Ling Simplified. But it was called The Fourth Phase of Water, and it received mixed reviews. Mixed. Some of the reviews said, "Oh, this is just more of Gilbert Ling," and we all know that Gilbert Ling is a crackpot, so pay no attention to it. That's one extreme. And the other extreme was some real enthusiasm, especially a guy from Harvard, and if it's from Harvard, we have to take it seriously, um, and a well-known cell biologist who said, "This is a 304-page preface to the future of cell biology."
Wow.
I like that one. Anyway, mixed reviews, and that's not true of the later book that The Fourth Phase of Water that came out, whose reviews are sometimes, if I'm feeling depressed, I look at the reviews and I feel better.
That's amazing.
There.
Can I stop you real quick just to ask a question about that experience of having the majority of academia and the scientific community look at Gilbert Ling's work and sort of throw it out and say, "Oh, he's a crackpot and he's a quack and he's pseudoscientific, yada yada yada." What were your thoughts on that, and what was it about you, the way you're constituted, for you to want to jump into this and explore it more deeply?
I had experience in the muscle contraction field, which gave me huge perspective. I understood very well the forces that propelled scientists to disregard or demean anything that challenged the status quo. And so in the muscle contraction field, the theory of the day, which still persists, was put forth by the late Sir Andrew Huxley, who was he was a Nobel laureate, knighted by the Queen, every accolade you can imagine. And I mean, as a member of the Huxley family, the distinguished Huxley family, you're treated like a godlike figure. And I remember many conferences, and Sir Andrew would walk in, and there was a hush. It was as though God has walked in, and and even scientists revere God. And so I understood some of the forces that were involved, because we took a challenging view of the prevailing theory of contraction, and obviously I think our view is correct, and yet most of the people, I would say, overwhelmingly disregarded anything we produced, and followed Sir Andrew Huxley. So my book on muscle contraction, 1990, I noticed I was sitting on the bookshelves of practically every muscle scientist, but I don't think that any of them ever cracked it open to find out what it said inside. There's a certain reverence for the towering figures of science, or you might say for the status quo. And I understood the reasons for this. The reasons, a career of a scientist. So suppose Alec, you're a young scientist, and you decide to go into the field of water or muscle contraction or whatever, and you want to build a reputation for yourself. And a way to build a reputation for yourself is not to countenance the work of a radical or revolutionary, however interesting the results might be, because you're not going to get grants. And if you don't get grants, you don't have a laboratory. And if you don't have a laboratory, you can't do anything, and there's a fair chance that if you don't have tenure, you'll be fired because you
Yep.
can't support yourself, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So there's a
You're
huge
pointing to a problem that pervades all of modern medical science as well. And going into the peer review process itself is like a good old boys club, and there's so many problems with that from a medical context. So I can imagine it relates to really any other branch of science as well.
any other branch of science. It basically boils down to psychology or sociology or whatever, and and that impacts all of us. It doesn't matter. And if there was something in the New York Times about a week or two ago discussing breakthrough science, and they have a new algorithm to figure out which scientific reports, if you will, are breakthrough kinds of science, and they plotted the number as a function of time from 1945 until the present day, and it's a steady declining graph that's headed towards zero, and it's more pervasive now than it's ever been. In 1945, it seemed after the war, people were relatively open, and there was a fair number of breakthroughs at the time. But it's the system that does it. And maybe I'm going further than you asked me to go, but
No, this is
I
okay.
studied this phenomenon, and I've actually worked myself at high levels with people at NIH and NSF, National Science Foundation, as an advisor, a consultant, whatever. And we discussed the problem. This is maybe a dozen years ago. We discussed the problem. The problem is widely acknowledged that these granting agencies are inhibiting agencies because so just to give an example, I hope I'm not deviating too far.
No, this is fine. This is good.
Yeah. So let's say you have the idea that the Earth is round, but everybody around you knows that it's flat, right? You just look out the windows. I can look out my window, and I see the lake here, and it's pretty flat. And in some places it's pretty flat as far as you can see. It's got some bumps and holes and whatever, but it looks pretty flat. And so it's easy to come to the conclusion that the Earth is flat. But you, Alec, you're a thinking scientist, and you've seen some images coming from the satellites, and you could see a curvature to the Earth, right? And so you're thinking, wow, this is pretty interesting. Everybody thinks the Earth is flat, but I see that curvature. And then you decide to check it out, and you fly around the world. You come back right to the same place where you took off. And that also is not consistent with a flat Earth, because you can't, if it's flat, you can't get back to where you started. So you go to the National Science Foundation and you say, here I am, I'm Alec, and I have this preliminary evidence that the Earth is not flat, it's round. And I would like to study it because if it's true, it's pretty meaningful, right? And I can't do this without money. So please, can you give me $500,000 over 3 years to study the shape of the Earth? And the gatekeeper receives your application, looks at it, and says, "Oh, this is pretty bold stuff. We all know that the Earth is flat, but this guy is proposing it's round. What could be more fundamental? So I'd better."
Hey, Jerry, real quick, your microphone has some muffling now. I don't know.
Oh,
it's better now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, I think I
good.
put my hand in the wrong spot.
Okay, all good.
Yeah, and so this is pretty bold, and therefore I'd better get the absolute world's experts in the shape of the Earth to come and make judgment. Is Alec's stuff complete nonsense, or does it have some sense to it? And the gatekeeper is doing his or her job properly, but what's the result of that? Well, the result of that is pretty obvious. It's the experts, the world's experts in the flatness of the Earth, people who are studying the little bumps and such, but the basic underlying theme is that the Earth is flat. And you're proposing not only that the Earth is round, but that this guy who's making judgment on you, his whole career is wasted because he spent a whole career based on the theme of flat Earth. And you're saying that everything he's done is worthless. And you can understand the outcome, right? You're not going to get your money. And all the people sitting around the review table are very happy that this guy or woman, or whatever, it comes to the conclusion that your stuff is worthless, because they also are kind of people whose careers have rested on the flatness of the Earth. So he's a hero, this person, for finding fault with your application. Well, the bottom line is that you don't get your money, and you're labeled a crackpot, and you're hated by all those people, and your future is in jeopardy. So if you're smart or canny, you're not going to propose that the Earth is round, right? And so your central theme or central idea, whatever that may be, if it challenges the status quo, it almost doesn't have a chance. And so it's the granting agencies that are promoting the maintenance of the status quo, and that's why we have so few breakthroughs. It's the increasing dominance of the granting agencies in good faith, but the way the system is set up, it's essentially guaranteed to promote the status quo.
Yeah, this is the experience of Harold Hillman, of Stefan Lanka, and even on the medical side of things, Dr. Cowan, Dr. Kaufman, and all of these people I'm friends with, is trying to break the status quo on pointing to at least some of the misconceptions and misinterpretations of modern day biology, cell biology, and the germ theory itself. And that's a whole tangent of a conversation that we don't need to necessarily get into. But let's get back to building off that context, how you were able to push the fourth phase of water to break through in this space to where it's becoming increasingly accepted amongst the scientific community.
Well, so I thought about that, and I'm kind of wondering myself, and I think one of the reasons is that the book that I wrote is it's not esoteric. The book on the fourth phase of water, about structured water, what we actually learned about the structure, which differs somewhat from previous ideas, and I'll tell you about that, but when we get to it, if we get to it, because some of the features are really central for biology. How was I able? So I think, first of all, it's not lashing out. I don't lash out at my colleagues who are objecting, because I understand what goes on.
You understand the headspace they're coming from.
Yeah, I understand, and I feel sad about it, because I think they're missing out. But the tendency to preserve the status quo is very strong, and it was Albert Szent-Györgyi, the father of modern biochemistry, won a Nobel Prize for discovering vitamin C. He was really open, and there are many famous sayings, and one of the sayings is that, and this was a really creative guy in many fields, including water. By the way, he said, "Life is water dancing to the tune of solids." He understood very well. But what he said is, whenever he had an idea, and there were lots of ideas, and he presented his ideas, he said it. He knew that he was onto something only when the reactions were polarized. So it meant that there had to be a bunch of people who thought, "Hey, this is a sensational idea. It might even be true." And the other side, it raised the hackles on other scientists, and they were absolutely furiously negative. Mm-hmm. So they were polarized. Reactions were polarized. Then he knew he was onto something. So it's inevitable, if you're putting through something that, putting up an idea that challenges the status quo, you're going to get negative feedback. And we've received negative feedback. There are a handful of papers that have been produced by various people who challenge um, what we've done. And I did respond to one early on, even before my book was published. The fourth phase of water was published, and there have been some others, and they're mostly similar to the first one that appeared. Um, and Well, for me, this is positive because it conforms to what St. Georgie was talking about. If there's something significant, then it's absolutely for sure that it's going to receive negative critical feedback. So one approach would be for me to respond to each one of those, and I think we have evidence that easily refutes what they have to say, or the others to just leave it, let it be, and that's my choice. And the reason for that choice is um, these battles can be endless, and if I come forth with a challenge to their challenge, they'll be right back to me as describing why my challenge is inappropriate, blah blah blah, and then it becomes extremely controversial. On the other side, because everybody is interested in water, um, at least peripherally, the presentation of the book and the papers that we've produced provide a groundwork for interpretation of so many things in so many fields wherever water exists. If it's really true that water has four phases, not three phases, then everything changes. And so many people have taken up, people who are not intimately studying water, so they don't feel challenged. Rather, they feel the opposite. This is a contribution which helps them understand what previously they couldn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the kinds of people who have, the feedback has been just amazing. And sometimes.
Well, let's get into the specifics of what you discovered then, because
Okay.
building off of Gilbert Ling's work, moving on to, you had your some people tell you that, hey, this is actually really interesting and quite fascinating. There's something here, and then you began studying it yourself. And what did you find?
Well, we found that Gilbert Ling's idea was not exactly right. So
Mhm.
Gilbert said water molecules are like dipoles, like a little bean with a plus at one end and a minus at the other end. And you can imagine these beans stacking. Uh, and that's the kind of structure that he was talking about. And he said that in the cell, there's a stacking of these water molecules, which means that essentially all the water inside the cell is so-called structured water. And that's what we thought initially. There was no reason to challenge it, except we started doing experiments and we found reason to challenge it. So let me explain the central experiment that we did and what we learned. So we put we had a water bath, and in the water bath we put tiny little particles, little spheres. They're called microspheres, and we knew that any kind of structured water is like a crystal, and crystals are pure. So anything that was in the water that formed the crystal, all the junk that was there have to be excluded, including those particles, if there really is this kind of structure. And we found it pretty quickly. We put some substance in the water. We started with a gel, with so-called hydrogels. I mean, it's a gel made of water, like Jello, in the water. And we looked in the microscope and we saw that starting at the surface of the gel, and building outward, those particles were excluded. So we had a zone, and it was appreciable in size, a few tenths of a millimeter, and later we found up to a millimeter, and sometimes in certain situations longer, where it was excluded, and um, these spheres were excluded, and we could see it was a clear zone. We called it exclusion zone for obvious reasons,
Mhm.
because it excluded. But I think a better term is fourth phase, because we found that indeed this water was ordered, although in a different way from what Gilbert Ling was suggesting. Um, and um, Well, we found that so many properties of this zone of water, so to speak, were different enough that we began to call it a fourth phase. So how is it different? Well, um, we stuck, one of the experiments we did was to stick electrodes that come to a very tiny point. In fact, parenthetically, invented by the same Gilbert Ling and used by so many people afterward that Gilbert, who got Nobel Prizes, that Gilbert should certainly have gotten a Nobel Prize.
Wow.
But that's a side comment. We stuck the electrode in, and we expected to find neutrality because water is neutral, but we didn't find that at all. We found that this zone was typically negatively charged, and the zone beyond that was positively charged. And
Wow.
so, I mean, this was, and we confirmed it with multiple experiments. And this was a really important.
Was that irrespective of the size of the container that water was in?
Well, there is an effect, yeah, but I think that's secondary to
Got it.
unless
No,
yeah,
no, no. Yeah, you go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, and so the way we were able to discern what's going on is that the water molecule is actually splitting for H plus OH minus, and the OH minuses were gathering, building to build this really large exclusion zone, and the H pluses. You start with H plus OH minus. That's water molecule. The H pluses were pushed out to lie beyond this negatively charged region. So why? So first of all, the result is not compatible with Gilbert Ling's idea of dipoles stacking, because you can stack dipoles, from here to infinity. You'll never get negative charge. It's always neutral. But we found negative charge, and we found it over and over again. So we knew it was correct. So Gilbert's idea um, had to be modified. And we, through various experiments and literature, we were able to deduce the structure of this. And the structure it's actually a planar, it's a stack of sheets, starting from that solid surface or gel surface or polymer surface, whatever surface. Many surfaces could give rise to essentially the same effect. That what would happen is that the water molecules, the gathering of OH minuses, would form hexagonal sheets with multiple hexagons consisting of oxygens and hydrogens. And these sheets would stack one upon another. So each one formed a template for the growth of the next sheet and the next sheet. And all of this came from ordinary water converted into either exclusion zone, easy water, easy to remember, or fourth phase water, whatever you want to call it. So this is fundamentally different from what Gilbert was talking about. And this has lots of implications if it's correct, and we think it's correct. And one of them is it's a battery, right?
Mhm.
So you've got negative at one end, positive at the other end, and batteries have lots of potential energy.
Mhm.
And so if this fills the cell, it must mean that there's a lot of energy coming from the water, effectively, from the water. And when you think about you and everything you do requires energy, and the question is, well, where does the energy come from? And there is a well recognized mechanism involving the creation of a high energy phosphate bond and ATP. But what we discovered is another potential mechanism, and that is an electrical mechanism that comes from this kind of water. And at this stage, we don't know whether the electrical contribution is trivial, minor, or maybe equal to the biochemical, or even more. There's some concern about the ATP idea, and if anybody has interest, it's worthwhile looking at Gilbert Ling's website, which persists, I understand, after his passing. It's gilbertling.org. And in it, he discusses the ATP issue, and he describes, better than I can describe, the story. So some years ago, I think now 70 or 80 years ago, a prominent group found that ATP had a high energy phosphate bond, and this was the probable source of energy in our body. A year later, another prominent group said, "No way." They said the first group made a simple arithmetic error, and there is no high energy phosphate bond. The
Wow.
point that Gilbert Ling has made is that nobody has followed up. To my knowledge, nobody has followed up. So we don't know whether the commonly accepted view is correct or whether the challenger is correct. And if the challenger is correct, then a lot of biochemistry is wrong,
Mhm.
and there's got to be another source of energy. And we don't know if they're wrong or right, and we don't know how much energy is supplied by the water, but the potential for a lot of energy delivery is there because what we found is that the charge is split and you have a battery-like effect. Okay, so another point is for any battery, every battery needs charging. You forget to charge your cell phone battery at night, and in the morning can't use it. And this is a battery too, and the battery needs charging. And we wondered what charges this battery? How does it get its energy? And it was discovered by a student, an undergraduate student who was, like many of the undergraduates, doing what he wasn't supposed to do. the, the undergraduates, they have spunk, and they like to try things, and
Yeah.
they don't need my advice or whatever. So the student was uh, had a chamber in front of him at the lab bench, similar to what I was describing to you, where we can see the exclusion zone, and there was a lamp sitting next to him, and he shined the light on the chamber, and where the light was incident on the chamber, the exclusion zone grew. It grew wildly, and he called me in, and I said, this is amazing. And so what happens if you remove the lamp? And he removed the lamp, and the expanded exclusion zone went back down to the control. So
Wow.
it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, well, it looks like photons, light is responsible. And we checked then doing real experiments, uh, careful experiments, and we found that it wasn't visible light, it wasn't UV light, it was infrared light. That is
Wow.
that is light whose wavelength is a little bit beyond the wavelength that our eyes can see, but an infrared camera can easily pick it up. And so, what I'm getting at is that infrared energy is all around us. We tend to think that infrared energy, from what we've learned, we look in the toaster whose coils are glowing, and we say, "Oh, it's heat, and it's producing radiant energy and glowing a bright orange. It's giving off infrared energy," and that's true, a lot of it. But infrared energy, in fact, comes from everything. If you turned off the lights in the room in which you're sitting, which looks like a living room or study or whatever, you absolutely couldn't see anything, and your cell phone camera, if charged, um, wouldn't record anything. But if you had a camera with, instead of a visible light sensor to capture the image, an infrared light sensor, then despite complete darkness, everything would show up, which means that everything is generating infrared energy. So it's all around you, which means that the energy that you need for building this battery is available all over. And
Wow.
and there are some places where there's a lot of it, in which case the buildup will be even greater. So that's the energy. So I think I've given you a kind of picture of what
Yeah.
fourth phase water is. It's actually H3O2. It's not H2O anymore. It can't be H2O because H2O is neutral, and
Mhm.
we found that typically it's negative. So, have I answered that question,
Yes,
or
you've answered it beautifully. So I have a few follow-up questions to that.
please?
Um, I am aware of several devices that are claiming to be able to take H2O and convert it to H3O2. And obviously, the actually, let me back up. Are we certain that this is the water that is lining our cells? This is the type of water.
Uh, well, I'd say we're not certain of anything
Yeah.
besides debt and taxes.
I'm not
Oh,
certain of taxes either, but yeah, yeah, I got you. That's
yeah,
well, okay. Is there a strong indication that this is the water that is lining our cells? And it's somewhat of a
yeah.
rhetorical question for me because in my cursory research and understanding that there is a pretty strong indication that this is the type of water that is
Well,
lining.
there is. There are a lot of points in that favor, but the central argument it might be that we know that next to hydrophilic surfaces, uh, almost all, not all, but almost all hydrophilic surfaces, easy water grows. If you've got infrared energy, and you do have infrared energy, and the cell is full of hydrophilic surfaces. And usually hydrophilic means charged surfaces. The two are not exactly interchangeable, but practically. And the proteins have surfaces that are mainly hydrophilic. There are patches that are hydrophobic and such, and the cell is just filled with proteins, and nucleic acids pretty much the same. So these are all hydrophilic substances, and next to hydrophilic substances, that's that's where easy water builds. Um, and so that's one piece of evidence. Next piece of evidence um, is the electrical potential of the cell. And if you stick an
Mm,
electrode in the cell, all cells read negative. Easy water is negative.
got it.
And so, the people who are listening, watching, if they have a background in biology, they're going to say, "Oh, wait a second, wait a second. The electrical potential has nothing to do with easy water. It has to do with pumps and channels of the membrane." And I've written extensively um, on the fact that this is not a valid interpretation of the
Mhm.
electrical potential. And I could go into it if you like, but we probably have other things to discuss. But I'll just say that if you stick the same electrode in the cell, which has a membrane and all the putative pumps and channels in the membrane, but the inside is kind of gel-like. If you take a gel instead of a cell, you stick the electrode in the cell and you stick the electrode in the gel, you get the same electrical potential. So it's kind of hard to argue that in the face of that in the cell, the electrical potential has something to do with the membrane and membrane components like pumps and channels.
Well, yeah, and not to go off on a tangent there again, but the work of Harold Hillman and other people would indicate that we're not even sure whether those things, some of the components of the cell, are artifacts or if they're actually the real components of the
Absolutely,
cell.
absolutely. Harold Hillman's work is brilliant, and
Mm,
everybody should see it. It's brilliant and simple and ignored by almost everybody,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, and
which
that's
is
why I brought that example up is that like his is another example of being ignored by all of modern molecular and microbiology.
well, yeah. I mean, it's the same story that we started with that someone who has a point of view that doesn't agree with the establishment has almost no chance these days um, of any success, and that's why I you know I'm sometimes pinching myself to realize that so many people are taking up the idea of the easy water, fourth phase water, uh, because it challenges so many paradigms. It's so central wherever there's water. If you consider that there's fourth phase water there, then everything is different. You have to begin from the foundation and build up. And unfortunately, I think that's what we need to do in many
Amen.
areas of science besides cell biology and such. So
Yeah, I was listening to an interview you conducted previously. I forget who it was with, but you referenced Luc Montagnier's experiment with water, and I want to get into the water memory piece. And it's really made me rethink the whole germ theory paradigm, because what virologists will refer to now is that the sequencing indicates that that the virus is present inside the fluids of a sick person. They sort of hold the cell culture isolation process to be irrelevant now. And within that context, I wonder if there's taking the work of Luc Montagnier and the DNA transference experiment. I wonder if there's some form of signaling happening with the water between two individuals on a cellular level that is literally causing that cell to express those RNA or DNA sequences.
Well, I'm not an expert on DNA and RNA, but I knew Luc Montagnier well, and we organize. I organize the annual conference on the physics, chemistry, and biology of water each year. This is, I think, our 15th year. We skipped the pandemic, but and we'd invite Luc, and he would come every year and present his stuff. And this was a receptive audience, because the people who come to our conference are mostly really open-minded people who are interested in new science. It's not the kind of people who say, no, everything you do can't be right because we know how it works. It's not that group. And so Luc's central experiment, for those who are watching who don't know about, is really controversial. And let me just repeat it, because I think a lot of people don't know. And I start by saying that despite its extraordinary nature, it's been now confirmed and published by 3 different groups, 2 from Italy and 1 from China. And so, it seems it's true if one takes a confirmation in other laboratories, but it's really strange and extreme, and it says a lot about the reality of water memory. So what Luc did was he took 2 tubes, 2 containers, and in one container, the first container, he put DNA, short 100 kilo or 100 base pairs, a short strand of DNA, and the information is contained in the sequence along the DNA. He put it in a buffer, aqueous buffer, and sometimes it would be diluted many times, so that not always, but in some of the experiments, giving the same result, diluted so many times that all that's left is water that had been in contact with the DNA. And that container containing DNA or water that had been in contact with it is thoroughly sealed. Nothing can get out. It's factory sealed, you might say. So there's no possibility of any chemical coming out of that container. And near that container, he puts another similar container containing only water, distilled deionized water. And the 2 are sitting next to each other. And they're in the presence of some kind of generic energy, like 60 hertz or 50 hertz or something. And they're sitting next to each other for a day or so. And his hypothesis is that information from this container, which either contains DNA, low concentration, or water that had been in contact with DNA, he says the information from the DNA is somehow being transferred to this container, and transferred not by chemical communication, because in the way he did it, it was just impossible. And then he'd take this container of water that had been impacted somehow by the subtle energy coming, and he made new DNA using the PCR reaction, which people know about because of COVID. Same sort of reaction. And he made new DNA, and the sequence of the new DNA was the same as the sequence of the DNA that had been sitting next to the water.
The implications of that are incredible. I have a question. I wonder if you've thought about this, and how how much do you think our consciousness and our intention is impacting that experiment and just water in general and water memory?
Well, how much? So how much by 5 pounds or 15 pounds?
Or do you think it is impacting it? That's a better
Yes,
way
I
to
think
go.
it's impacting, and it's not. This is not my speculation. This is the consequence of experimental results, and uh, so as I said, we have this conference each year, and typically there are going to be 2 or 3 presentations by people who have evidence for memory of water, and they're all different. All the experiments are done differently. And there's one that I think of. What's his name? I'm sorry, he passed some years ago, from Stuttgart in Germany. Maybe you remember his name.
Mm-mm.
So I no, I'll tell you. He was actually an aerospace engineer, but his real passion was consciousness and water, and memory of water. So here's his experiment. He has one source of water. He has a bunch of slides, like the kind of slide that you use in a microscope. And he takes some of the water, and he drops one droplet on one slide, one droplet on the second slide, one droplet on the third slide, and maybe there was 4. I don't remember. And he gives this to one subject, one experimental subject. The subject goes into a room and sits with the 3 slides and waits for the water to evaporate. And you'd think that all of the droplet of water, pure water, would evaporate, but it doesn't. It leaves a residue on the bottom. And we think that residue is easy water, which doesn't evaporate. It sticks to the surface, and it'll form a pattern. And so he does the same thing with observer number 1, and then observer number 2. Again, same water, droplet, droplet, droplet. Go into your room and sit there next to the slides and wait for them to evaporate, and does this with multiple subjects. So it turns out, if you look at subject number 1 and look at the dried pattern, it'll have it's not it's like a piece of art. It has structure to it. You could either, for example, see concentric circles, or you can see patches, whatever. And it turns out, for subject number 1, if you look at the 3 slides, it's very similar. The patterns that you see are very, very similar to one another. Now, for subject number 2, they're also similar to one another, but different from subject number 1. And subject number 3, again, has his or her own unique stamp, you might say.
Wow.
And so the conclusion of this scientist, I apologize, I'm blocking on his name. The conclusion is that there's some information that comes from subject number 1 that's imparted to the water. He's sitting right next to the water. And subject number 2 is imparting his or her own information to their water. And of course, if they're imparting information to the water, then when it dries, the information will show up in the easy water in different ways, because there are different information. However, it's the same for observer number 1. All 3 of those slides, the patterns are the same. So obviously, something is coming from each of those subjects, and from each subject it's different. So this is one response to your question. And I what you can extrapolate from those results is that, yeah, there is some information coming from us to the water, and especially to the EZ water, because EZ water has structure to it, and in a way it's sort of like similar sort of structure that exists in computer memory. And if you think about the difference between ordinary liquid water and EZ water, liquid water has molecules that are bouncing around at a furious rate, and they're all randomly oriented. And it's really hard to think of how that kind of water could store information. But EZ water is like a crystal, and computer memories are like crystals. And this particular crystal, EZ water, fourth phase water crystal, contains hydrogen and oxygen. And oxygen, it turns out, has multiple states, multiple oxidation states. -2 is the usual one that we think of in terms of oxygen from our chemistry book, but the same chemistry book also says that oxygen can have -2, -1, 0, +1, +2 oxidation states. So just like a transistor, it can have like a 0 or 1. The EZ array can also, each oxygen can have different states. And so there's ample capacity for, at least theoretically, there's ample capacity for the EZ water to store information. And I think that's where it's stored. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question. Yeah. I was just thinking, for people who experience, if it is true that we are that our cells are lined with easy water, and
Not lined with, but filled with.
comprised of
Yeah.
easy water. Thank you for checking me on that. I just wonder about how a lot of the times when people experience a traumatic event, they sort of block that out. And we talk about cellular memory, and we're talking about water memory here, and maybe they're one and the same. And I wonder if it's we don't remember those traumatic events. It's because of the scenario you're describing here, where the water molecules are all frantic because they're not structured in that state when we're in a tense state. Possibly, I don't know if you've ever thought about that.
Well, I haven't thought about that specific scenario, but I can say something that bears on what you said. The cell is filled with easy water, and the easy water we concluded was necessary for function. I can expand on that in a moment, but there's no such thing as a cell without easy water.
Wow.
It would be non-functioning, you see, and it could be that certain cells lose some structure, but they wouldn't work without the structure. And let me just explain the reason. So, and this is half of the book on the cells, gels, and the engines of life. Half of that book describes Gilbert Ling, and says, and half describes what the structured water, now we say easy or fourth phase water, what the structured water, what's the role of the structured water? It doesn't just sit there and do nothing. It actually does something. And what we found is that when cells, I'm speaking in terms of a generality, there's evidence for 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of cells. So I'm extrapolating to all cells, but of course, we haven't studied all cells, but there's a generality that seems to emerge, and that is when the cell is activated to do what it's designed to do. For example, a muscle cell designed to contract. When it's in the relaxed state, not contracting, then the water is structured or easy water. When it transitions to the activated state, then so-called phase transition, where it's not just the proteins that undergo conformational changes, but also the water. The two of them do it together. It's the water and the proteins that are responsible, for example, for the muscle, for the contraction. The two together. It's not that the water remains as it is. It undergoes a transition. And after the contraction is over, then the water transition and the proteins transition back to the original state. So all the water undergoes transition from fourth phase to liquid water and then back again. And as I said, there's evidence for this in the 4 or 5 cell types that we investigated. And we extrapolate to think that it might be characteristic of all cells that have work to do, so to speak, that this transition of the water, not just the protein, the water from one state to another is central to the operation. And therefore, if a cell doesn't have any fourth phase water, it can't do it, can't work, can't function. So you want to make sure that your cells are filled with easy water, which it basically translates to a normal electrical potential, minus 70, minus 80, minus 90, and that's indicative that you have a cell full of easy water. But so your thesis on which you base your question, um, about not having easy water, the cell will die if it
Not
doesn't have,
possible.
because
Yeah.
it doesn't function. Yeah.
Well, do you think it's important then to knowing that water all sort of goes through this phase change? Is it important to drink structured water? Because there's a lot of talk of that in the holistic slash natural health communities. And I myself structure my water every day, or I think I'm structuring my water or converting it to easy water. Um, is it important to drink easy water then?
Well, it's helpful to drink easy water. And so if you drink ordinary liquid water, without much easy water in it, easy, there's no source of pure easy water that I know of that's commercially available. You drink ordinary water, liquid water with some easy in it, and so if you just drink ordinary water, what happens is that your body will convert at least some of that into easy water, and a lot of it gets peed out, and but it and the reason or the mechanism is that your body is receiving lots of infrared energy from outside, which is the fuel to build this, but also from inside, the core of your body undergoing metabolism generates heat, generates infrared energy, and that infrared energy is then used to build easy water. So simply drinking water is okay for you, because some of it will turn into the easy water that you need. But logic says, well, if you drink the easy water to begin with, it spares the body of the necessity to convert it into easy water, because you're drinking it directly. Now, I know there are companies that are selling fourth phase, easy structured water, and um, that they may indeed be selling the real goods. I would feel more confident if I could see evidence from them that what they're touting is really what they have. Um, but yeah, so let me just leave it at that. It may be, what I want to say is that there's another method which is proven really good, which involves the drinking of easy water, and that is so-called juicing. So what's juicing? You go into your backyard and you take some of the freshly grown plants, healthy plants. You take, for example, the leaves, and you put it into one of the many machines available to smash it down and crush it and get the juice from it. Uh, and then you drink the juice. So what are you drinking? You're drinking you're drinking the water from inside the plant cells. And the plant cells are fresh and vigorous, and they're just full of easy water, just like our cells. So you get
Mhm.
it from the plants, and you drink it. And what I've heard from various health practitioners is it works. It's actually one of the simplest ways, if you've got a little bit of time, to heal yourself of virtually any issue. Um, so, I mean, I can't present evidence for you of this, but there probably is evidence. I haven't followed it exactly, but I know from health practitioners, they say, "Oh yeah, this person had this problem or that problem," and I told them to do daily juicing, and they came back 3 months later, and they were feeling great, and they
Mhm.
also lost weight. So, I don't.
Oh no, Jerry, you're frozen. I don't know if that's on my end or your end. If you're in the chat, could you let me know if Jerry's frozen or is it on my end and I'm frozen? Okay. Yeah, it looks like Jerry's frozen. If you guys have any questions for Jerry when he comes back on, please just ask it in the chat. Hopefully you're enjoying this conversation. I know I am. My mind is like spinning with so many different implications for Jerry's work. It's pretty incredible. Okay, hopefully he'll hop back on in just a second. Yeah, I'll just read through the comments here. Hold on. Smoothies are great. Then sounds like, yep. Yeah. Yeah, or even like water fasting. I was going to ask him about tapping into liquid plasma too, Nick. I don't know if that's appropriate appropriate to ask him about urine therapy. Yeah, this has been so fascinating. Yeah, see, I'm like tying in the work of so many different people here, and honestly, a lot of episodes that I've done recently. Obviously, I haven't done a public episode with Veda Austin in a while, but we have it on our The Way Forward membership. There's a 2.5 hour presentation that Veda gave that was incredible. Tying that work in with Melissa Sell's work and knowing that water retains memory, and the reason we have here's Jerry. Okay, here we go.
We missed about 1 minute.
That's okay. That's okay. We're good. We're good. I was just explaining to the audience all of these different things that I'm tying into my head right now with the human biofield and biofield anatomy and possibly German new medicine and the implications that emotions have for disease symptoms, and resolving those emotions lead to those symptoms of illness resolving, and just all these things that are related to water and water fasting. But I had a question picking up where we left off regarding water memory in homeopathy specifically, because what you kind of said subtly regarding Luc Montagnier's experiments is you said something to the effect of diluting the amount of DNA that was in the water, something to that effect, but there's still some sort of memory or energetic imprint on the water there, I think is what you were saying. So have you thought about this within the context of homeopathy?
Yeah. In fact, I did a presentation on that. There was a House of Lords Royal Society of Chemistry symposium a few years ago on homeopathy, and I gave a talk at that. And yeah, I mean, what you hit on in a subtle way is absolutely true. So the water contains memory, and if the water contains memory, it means when you dilute, it means that it's possible, at least, that information from the molecules that you started with is present in the water. The water retains the memory. So you can dilute from today until next year, and you should still have information no matter how much you dilute it. And it doesn't prove that that's what happens in homeopathy, but I think it does, because the principle should be the same. And if anybody who's listening, watching, has an interest, the person who did the most beautiful work on homeopathy is a fellow who passed recently, a Russian superstar, Alexander Konovalov, Konovalov. And Konovalov was head of a big institute in Kazan, in Russia, a chemistry institute, and then he became rector, president of his university for, I think, 11 years, and distinguished in so many ways in science, a real hero in Russia. And he produced many papers, in many of them in English, and his work is not so well known, but it's so critically important for everything we know about homeopathy. And of course, it has to do with its high dilutions and what happens during the high dilutions. And it's not as the critics say, because it's not just you dilute and you produce, and the more you dilute, the more liquid water you produce. But it looks as though as you dilute and shake, you're producing easy water, and the easy water could retain the information that had been there at the outset. And it does link to the experiments of Luc Montagnier, who appreciated very much about homeopathy and what it meant, and in fact, how effective it could be.
Wow. And Veda has done some experiments recently. We're an hour and 10 minutes into this, and this is the first time we're bringing up Veda Austin. That's incredible because I would have figured we would have brought her up like 10 times by now. But she let me know that she's done some experiments recently where she started noticing that a lot of people who are repeating her process throughout the world were talking about how their children were taking the ice and eating it after she had frozen the water. And she started asking her audience how often this was happening. And a lot of people came back and said that their kids had done this, and they sort of had this intuitive knowing that the ice was good for them. And so she started playing around with writing some words or saying a blessing over the water and setting an intention for that feeling or that experience or that which they would like to bring about in their life. And eating the ice after it was frozen from that water that what the intention was set over actually brought about those experiences thereafter.
Well, that's very interesting, indeed. So I don't have a specific comment that except to say that when ice melts, this is what we found, and it's described in my fourth phase book. Um, um, Ice doesn't melt directly into water. Ice melts into EZ, which then converts into liquid water. And it's the same thing when you want to freeze water. Um, you take liquid water, and first it converts into EZ, and then the EZ converts into ice. Both ice and EZ water have hexagonal motifs, so you can sort of understand how that might be logical, but we found it's true, So people who are enjoying sucking on ice, on melting ice, are actually imbibing EZ water.
Mm.
Whether that EZ water contains information or not, I don't want to speculate, but it doesn't surprise me that kids will enjoy sucking on the ice, and because they're getting EZ water. And EZ water affects everything in your body, including your brain. If your brain, I think the default situation for most of us is for our brains to feel happy and satisfied with life and not depressed. We're not designed to be depressed, which apparently half the people are. We're designed to be healthy. And if you get EZ water and your brain is somewhat deficient in EZ water, causing this depression, you get filled up and you feel happy. And I got to tell you an experience as a kid. And I told the story, but it so impacted me. Maybe I was 10 years old at the beach. Growing up in New York City, we had Brighton Beach, and in the summertime it was beastly hot, and you could go to the beach and you will find practically all of New York at the beach, trying to cool off. So I was there with my friends, and my friends, we were 10 years old. What do you do? So you figure out something to have fun, and we were burying each other. And so I was buried, and it was getting late in the day, and the tide was coming in. I was buried near the tide. My head was sticking out. My whole body was buried. And I remember feeling so good, so happy, so pleased, just an ecstasy, being buried up to here. I didn't want to get unburied, and they were saying, "We got to go home." And so I remember the feeling, even from I was a kid. I don't remember too much from my kid days, but I remember this because I remember the feeling of ecstasy, and I think what the reason was that I was connecting myself electrically to the earth, and it was only the past 10 or 15 years that I learned that the Earth was negatively charged, I was shocked, so to speak, to find out, because I started my career by studying electrical engineering, and no professor ever told me that the Earth was negatively charged. It was all neutral, but the evidence is clearly there. It's just that we don't know about it. We don't learn about it. In Russia, they do learn about it, and I was told, to my embarrassment, that every Russian middle school student knows that the Earth is negatively charged, and in the U.S.,
Wow.
almost nobody knows about it. So, anyway, building EZ is really important for essentially every feature of your existence, including what goes on in your brain. And so, if going back to how this started, right, it started with you're talking about the kids liking to suck on the melted ice. It's possible that the EZ water actually was refilling or topping up, you might say, their brain, and the same sort of feeling was conferred to them by drinking so to speak, drinking the EZ water, as the experience I had being buried in the
Wow.
beach.
Wow.
So it's not just your liver and your kidney, but your brain too.
Mhm. Jerry, have you thought about, I'm sure you have, this is a rhetorical question. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the implications for our consciousness affecting water, and us being comprised of EZ water, and knowing EZ water has a higher capacity higher energetic capacity or potential, and also that EZ water is able to store memory better. How much, just your thoughts on how much we're impacting each other on an energetic level just by being in proximity to each other.
Well, that's a difficult question. I really don't think I can answer how much, because I don't know how much. Um,
Well, just your general thoughts on it, though. Like, what have you thought
well, it's
about in
important.
regards to that?
It's absolutely important. In fact, I think it's important enough. Well, we're starting studies on this, on this very subject. Looking at we're actually looking at healers, people who are able to create healing. And we have some experiments that were just now beginning. We did some preliminary, sort of figuring out what we're going to do studies. And we have a meeting this afternoon to discuss the exact protocols, where we have a container of water, and we have a healer. And the healer comes into this room and does whatever healing he or she would be doing ordinarily, but does it to the water. And we look at the water before and after, and we're looking for differences in physical, chemical properties of the water. So we're trying to figure out whether healers have this capacity. And we're also planning to deal with long distance healers, because all the evidence that I mentioned is presented at our conference year after year. It says that there's something going on. It's practically undeniable that something is going on. And that something could be really important. It's just, conventional science rejects it, because, we think we know everything. And all the physical principles have already been revealed, and nothing more of any particular interest or substance can ever happen. Obviously, I think that's completely wrong. And my guess is that what you're driving at will be at the frontier of science. It's not right now, but enough people are displaying interest in it, and are beginning to study it, that it's going to rise to that level, I think. And so, if it does, then there'll be a lot of studies, and then the answers to your questions should become evident. But right now, we're at a primitive state. It's sort of like when electricity was first, or electromagnetic waves were first identified, nobody, it seemed exotic and strange, and nobody could understand really what's going on. And gradually we've learned. I'm not sure all of our learning is correct, but we've learned quite a bit about it. And I think this is, in a way, similar. We're at the threshold.
Mhm.
A lot of evidence points to these subtle energies, as some people refer to it. They seem to be there. They seem to be able. The energy seems to be able to be conferred over very long distances.
Yeah.
We don't know, how
I mean,
long.
Veda talks about she's done experiments where she had someone project a thought onto the water that she was holding, and she's 7,000 miles away from them, and there was
Yeah,
results.
and she got a result that
Yep.
was consistent with that impact.
Yep.
Yeah, other people. There's a guy in Germany who's been doing that using an impedance spectrometer, looking at the water. Again, information coming from halfway across the globe, and the person projects their energy, and he records it in Germany, and he gets the water changes based on what's being conveyed at that great.
Oh no, I think we're losing them again. Oh, okay. You're good there. You're good now. It looked like we were losing you there again for a second, Jerry.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure why, but
It's
yeah,
okay. We can do you have
yeah.
time for like a couple questions from the audience, and then we can wrap up?
A couple questions. Yeah,
Oh no, it's messing up again. Here we go. We'll try one. Okay. Oh no, guys. It looks like Jerry is freezing up again. Oh man. Okay. Might as well just wrap it up here. Thank you guys for tuning in. Sorry that we couldn't get a few questions in for Jerry, but I'm sure that I can email him. So if you have any questions, just go on my Telegram channel and just post your comment with your question. I can ask Jerry. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.